Well, this week, well, not this week. It's today. Since can you believe this? I try to do these things daily because I want to make my life hard. Do you think I'm going to be able to
You
sustain
really
that?
do these daily?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Oh,
I
I
mean,
thought
I've been
okay.
doing it now. This is one of those things. I've been doing it daily for, I think this is the fifth day. So now
Okay.
I don't do it on the weekend because we
Right.
work in a sophisticated organization that would not tolerate such nonsense. So I got that
Yeah.
going on. But I forgot what I was talking about. But here we are.
But do you publish daily, or do you have like a little
Oh
a little
man,
buffer so that when you go on holiday?
I am creating a buffer,
Okay.
both in my midsection and in my media asset area. So
Excellent. Excellent.
we do have. I live here in Amsterdam, and we've got like there's a week off in October at some point, and so I
Hmm.
was thinking like even though we can't really go anywhere or do very much, I should take that time off. So I do need to buffer something up. I'm gonna do some buffering.
For sure.
Yeah,
The internal hobbies have been a godsend, I think,
that's
this
right.
time around. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Anyhow, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, so I'm Jorge Castro. I work at VMware as a Kubernetes community manager.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm part of the Tanzu organization.
Yeah, and you were reminding me that we met a long time ago back in Austin somewhere. We weren't quite sure where, but
Yeah.
we knew that you know who what he is. What was that Woody Allen movie where there's like Zelensky or Zelig? I think the Zelig of our world is Bart and George. You just
Yeah.
look you
All I remember is we were hanging out,
uh-huh.
and I think I'd heard of you before, like from your blogs and Twitters from like a long past. And then Barton just introduced you as Kote. He was like, "Do you know Kote?" And I was like, "Doesn't he have a first name?" And for some reason, I've always remembered that. And
Yes.
yeah,
That is my strange affectation. Over
yeah,
here in Europe, it freaks people out, or it doesn't freak them out. Europeans don't get freaked out about anything. They raise their eyebrows a little bit. They're
yeah. And then
curious.
I believe we were trying to convince him to give us laptops, and I don't think that worked.
Oh yeah,
Confident that didn't
yeah.
work at all.
It's always hard to get some of those out of. Yeah, they're fine laptops. The XPS 13 Developer Edition. I think there's two or three other profiles now. I think
Oh
that
yeah.
was. Yeah, that's kind of. I should have him on here at some point to talk about that because
They just got refreshed too. I literally started looking internally. I was like, how do I get one of these?
yeah, yeah.
Because I'm due for that laptop refresh soon. So,
Yeah, that would. Well, anyways,
yeah.
so is this an accurate way of putting it that in the VMware Tanzu, formerly Heptio world,
Mhm.
you do community stuff
Yeah.
for in the Kubernetes community world?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So do you want me to explain like how that works, the position and all that
yeah,
stuff?
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So usually,
Yeah, go ahead.
VMware, we obviously build our products on top of Kubernetes and things like that. And similar to other companies that build products on Kubernetes, the health and maintenance of the community itself is important. So um, VMware has this position that's specifically to work on upstream stuff. So I'm a co-chair of SIG contributor experience. So Kubernetes is organized into these things called SIGs, which are
Mm,
working group style things where it's like a bunch of people and they work on a certain part of Kubernetes. So I have counterparts at Red Hat, Google, etc., things like that. And so there's a diverse group of people who work in Kubernetes. Some don't work full time on it at all. Some do. And then some work at maybe smaller companies and do it on shorter amount of time, or some people just do it for fun on the weekend kind of things, or on the spare time. So
and
but for us, because Kubernetes is so crucial for us,
yeah,
we usually like invest in ensuring that things are looking good upstream. So I wear my upstream hat probably 80% of the time, I would say.
oh, upstream hat. Do you have that lying around somewhere?
I
That's
do actually, but I gave it to someone at KubeCon. Paris made these ridiculous sailor hat because everything has to have a sailor nautical theme. So someone actually made those
Yes.
silly navy looking hats with the symbols on them.
Yeah, yeah,
I did not like.
yeah.
I was keen to give that one away.
You got the sartorial like diversity of Nantucket there. All sorts of crazy
Yeah.
stuff going on. Just
Yeah, it's either nautical or Greek, and then they just mix it up, and then everything has to be named.
mm.
It's like the meme.
So all right. So you already laid out a whole lot of things there,
Words.
and this is exactly what I wanted to why I wanted to talk with you. Is I'll fully admit I don't actually really know much about the Kubernetes community insofar as like even the words to you, but just like how it works and what the parts are, and
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
never mind the sentiment. That could be a whole other second episode. We can be like, boy, check out those people. How about these ones, and how they all fit together and enjoy each other.
Right.
But more of just sort of like, if you look at any community as not only this, but one way of looking at community is it's just like a system or a machine or it's a tool, right? Like a living organism of a tool.
Yeah.
So I was curious just to, like, from my own edification, to kind of go over how it all works, how it's laid out.
Sure.
But then also the thing I'm curious about is from the perspective of like let's say an application developer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how you would kind of help them navigate through what they're supposed to do. And just to end my, you know, as I'm fond of saying, I like to ask questions that end in periods. So let me finish my sentence here. Is like, I think in thinking about what we talk about in the framing, I was thinking like, you know, at least in my experience, for any given community, there's kind of, let's say 3 to 4 parties involved. And you could even think of them as types of developers, or let's just say developers. There's parties that aren't developers, but basically there's the community of the developers who work on the stuff, right? They're the ones who actually write the code.
Right.
And then you've got this other set of developers that are interested in the community, and usually they come from the people, if the community is like this, that commercialize it, right? That use the open source and do however it might be commercialized, and that could include like whether it's vendors like ourselves or system integrators or whatever. But they're people who are interested in this chunk of code because it's part of their business to sell it. And then the third one that you have, and I guess I would put service, you know, cloud people in that second bucket. I don't know. But then the third bucket is basically like what I'm calling application developers. And I'm going to come up with a fourth one now, I'm remembering. But the application developer is like, you know, if you want to transfer money between 2 people, I write that application and all the stuff that you would need for that. And now that I'm talking to myself here, there's a fourth category, I think, in Kubernetes, which is they're not application developers, but they're like platform developers. I don't know what the Kubernetes world calls that. But anyways,
Yeah.
that's my theory of like things that move around. And now you're here and you can you can tell me how it actually works.
Let's go over all 4 of them, but I want to do application developers last.
Sounds good.
So first I would categorize as Kubernetes core developers, right?
Yeah.
These are people who are working in the project. You know, they're in owners files, which so in the source tree of Kubernetes, there's a little file called owners in every directory. And in there's a list of GitHub handles, right? And if your name is in there, you're responsible for that code and, you know, some
makes
of the
sense.
pull requests that you review. So we have on any given time, we have about 1,000, and I'm kind of squiggly 1,000 core developers that have contributed significant contributions to the code base.
Yeah.
Out of those, probably around 750-ish have been active in the past cycle or so. The reason I know this is we're in the middle of having an election and we had to figure out who's been active. So that's kind of the figures there. So about, you know, I like to say about 1,000 core developers, and then it depends, right? Sometimes somebody might be working on something and they are in one of these other groups that you mentioned. So they might cycle out to do product or something for a while at wherever they work and then come back and do more upstream stuff. So, you know, depending on the organizations, that's just kind of how that goes. So that, you know, you look at it because every time you go to a conference, you know, everyone's talking about these numbers and how great they are. However, I think what makes Kubernetes really cool is the second group, which is more of like outside the core developers. So we've had about, I think the number is up to like 42,000,
right,
what we call drive-by contributors. And these are people who just wanted to fix something. You know, they did a pull request, but, you know, maybe they don't work on it for full time, or they're trying to like deploy it at work and they found a bug, et cetera, that kind of thing. I've been doing Kubernetes for almost 3 years now. And the entire time I've been here, there's always been 1,000 open pull requests, to give you an idea of like the velocity of the amount of pull requests that are coming in. And our velocity has been increasing as far as, you know, trying to integrate as many of those as possible and get those reviewed. Obviously we're not going to catch everyone, and I can give you tons of examples of where, we kind of messed that up. But, just to give you the size of the scope of this thing, it's just every time I think it's like, okay, well, maybe this cycle, will level out. And then every single time I look, the numbers just keep continuing. So that's one of the things that's, I don't want to say keeps me up at night, but one of the things that we try to focus on is things like sustainability and, how do we get maybe senior developers that started off in the project writing lots of code? How do you get people into kind of a ladder so they're mentoring new contributors and things like that, so we can keep all of that going?
I guess you're right, because that is one of those, one of my favorite business BSE kind of phrases is a good problem to have, right? And so what you just described, I think, is a good problem to have. That you have a lot of people who want to contribute, and then you have to deal with that.
And it's complex, right?
Yeah,
because Kubernetes is, you've heard it described as like the operating system for like the data center or the cloud, whatever.
Sure.
Whatever you believe. But either way, there's tons of components, right? We have something like 43 SIGs, or it's above 30 or around, depending on what's cycled up or down. And then there's working groups that we spin up and down. But there are lots of components to Kubernetes. So it's not just, hey, I want to do a thing on Kubernetes. It's like, are you into storage, networking? Are you into what happens on the node itself?
Right.
Are you into etcd? Like, there's all these kind of distributed components. And on top of that, you got the meta parts of the project that you need. So the SIG I participate contributor experience, our whole job is when someone does a pull request, are they getting, is that pull request getting in the right eyeballs, in a reasonable amount of time?
Yeah,
right? So
yeah. You've got to route it to the right group that's responsible for that part.
So we depend a lot on automation, right?
Yeah.
And as a result of that, that can lead to some friction, right? So if you wanted to do a pull request today, literally a bot is the first thing that talks to you, which is kind of awesome. Wow. You come from a background, right, where smaller open source projects, you like the personal touch, and hey, it's nice to meet you. Thanks. But like at this scale, there's just no reasonable way to do this without automation. So, we have a bot, checks to see if you sign the CLA.
Makes sense.
It'll say, hey, you haven't assigned a SIG to this. Here are the commands you can assign. Or if you don't know what to do and it sits there after a while, the bot will try to put it on the radar of whatever SIG we think it might, own depending on where you did a pull request. And then it kind of goes through this like long, process. And if you're new, that could be very intimidating, right? Because it's like, I did a pull request and the bot's already,
yeah, that's it. It's interesting.
So it can be overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, I always, nowadays, I always get kind of excited when there's an actual bot for customer service, because like the alternative is like talking to someone. And it's made me realize that like, I guess not talking to a human has a bad reputation because of like IVRs and stuff, but like it has a bad reputation when it doesn't work well. And so like if it works, it's anyways, that's a unrelated parenthetical there. But okay. So
we have bots, we have labels, and we do, like when I mentioned this scale, there is a lot of, like we can't just consume normal GitHub.
Yeah.
So there's like, part of the things we do in our SIG, and we have representatives that actually talk to GitHub directly, right? We're working with them when it comes to like, hey, you have a senior developer, who's getting pinged, and the notifications workflow that they first started to land, like, that might work for, 90% of developers on GitHub, right? But, at our scale, how do you manage all these?
How do you route all that through, right?
Yeah. So that's like an awesome thing that we do, where there's like a constant feedback loop where, GitHubbers will come to KubeCon and and we'll meet with them regularly. And we're kind of always, hey, we want to automate doing this. How should we do it? Just the kind of day-to-day things to make that process easier. And that helps us kind of manage the drive-by contributor.
Do you use that what's that actions thing they have in GitHub? I forget what they call it, but you can like chain together a bunch of things. Do y'all use that?
We actions.
Is that what they're called?
We use actions for lots of stuff. I mean, we have a bot. We have a bot called Prow that I think actually other projects have started to use as well. But that's the thing that, and it's all open source. It's all in our infra. Everything we make is open source.
Yeah,
So
you got to watch out because then you're going to have a bunch of people who are building a platform for building a platform that are building a platform for building platforms.
yeah,
That just on the kind of like you're going to be 4 or 5 levels deep once you start getting there.
when I first started, there was an awesome bug in the bot where it was actually talking to itself, and I should have bookmarked it because it's a bot talking to itself. And I remember Chris Nova responding, being like, "What's happening here?" And it was just like this. It was like this perfect storm of like when automation,
Goes wild.
yeah, exactly.
So okay, so you've mentioned a couple times you have these SIGs. I assume that's the old.
Yes.
You haven't come up with a new meaning for that. It's a special interest group.
Special interest.
And so what is a SIG in the Kubernetes world?
So a SIG is a working unit. It's kind of our basic working unit where things get done. So SIGs own code and responsible for certain parts of the Kubernetes code base. So let's say you were a networking person and you were like, "Hey, I want to get into Kubernetes." And I would say, "Hey, what are you into?" And you say networking. I would tell you, you probably want to go to SIG Network. And each SIG has a public meeting, a YouTube playlist, meeting notes. They have co-chairs. They have tech leads. They have members. They generate their own KEPs, which are Kubernetes enhancement proposals. So if you want to write a new feature, you work on a KEP. Those get checked into an enhancements repo. People discuss it. Everything happens in GitHub. And then people implement it. If you file a bug on a networking component, that ends up on SIG Network's radar. So we have those SIGs kind of control the different areas of the code base.
And then
SIG.
And do SIGs have like sub SIGs, or is it just like there's more or less a 1-to-1 mapping of like?
Yeah, they have sub projects.
Yeah.
That own certain parts that you want to split up.
Right.
So,
like I imagine networking is quite large, and as far as like things that it would do, so you would have many sub SIGs there. Yeah.
Right. And then like SIG cluster lifecycle, which is responsible for the installation upgrades and stuff. They have tons of sub projects as well. So if you've used the tool Kind, there's a sub project for Kind. There's one just for Kube admin. There's one for Cops. I think Cops is a sub project. I might need to look that up. But tools that you use, to use Kubernetes, lots of those belong to SIGs, and they may or may not be a sub project within a certain SIG, depending on how they're organized.
Okay. So in other open source communities, you have the similar construct, right? Depending on the type of open source community, like the project might be small enough that it is its own thing, right? Like it's like it's just like, I don't know, whatever. But then you might have much larger. Like I imagine, I don't know how, like for example, well, in the Eclipse world, Eclipse is a lot of different things, and so there's many different subgroups and subgroups of subgroups. But okay, so the unit of the people who work on a concern or a component of Kubernetes is a SIG, which can be further divided into sub ones. And then they're also the ones who basically, that is the entity that can make suggestions. What would you call them? Creps, like suggestions of KEPs of things to do. They're not very thin pancakes. You got to be careful over here in Europe. Sometimes when they tell you there's a pancake, you get a crep, and it's just like that.
You don't like them? Oh, that's like
no. They're good, but imagine if you're like, I would like a big stack of American pancakes, and then you get like some delicious sugary doilies instead, right? Like, maybe it would be delightful. It's just the expectations don't match up is the issue. So, okay. So now,
a point I do want to make before you go on, however, is in the early days, a lot of things were in core, right? In github.com/Kubernetes. We've been remember that whole thing I talked about sustainability?
Yeah.
We've been making efforts to, if something isn't core or important, kind of move it out of the core repository and break it down into other repositories that may or may not be in core. So something like cloud providers, used to live in core, and it's taken us years to like remove those to allow cloud providers to work on things at their own pace without having like the kind of things, having to deal with getting reviews in core and all that kind of stuff. So there's been an effort to actually, if this isn't a core thing, does it really need to live in the core repository? And a lot of people have been working to remove that to kind of help, like I said, with the sustainability. If we're removing things that aren't important to core remain tightly scoped.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Right.
You've got to continually make sure that you're not creating a giant SIG, I guess,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is unmanageable. Okay. So then typically, I mean, like you said, if there's code to be owned, there's code, but I imagine there's other SIGs that aren't necessarily directly code related, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So this is one of the cool things for those of you who aren't coders in the audience is Kubernetes needs every skill set that you can possibly have, not just coders. So we have a few SIGs. First of all, we have a steering committee, which kind of, sets the tone for the project. The steering committee doesn't lead the technical direction of the project. That is powered down to the SIGs themselves, right? So there's no meeting where everyone sits down and says, we're all going to do the SIGs kind of lead the way there. And usually steering is there for like governance reasons.
Sure.
And to help kind of delegate responsibility. And then you have SIG release, which is kind of a meta SIG that kind of coordinates with all the SIGs on what it takes to release all at once, right? So they select a release lead. There's a release team, and it is very new user friendly as well. You can absolutely not know a lot about Kubernetes or the project and get involved in SIG release. They have a nice shadow program. They have like little cookbooks. It's like, hey, I volunteered to be the person that's going to write the blog posts. Here are your instructions, and here's all the past work, and here's all the people that are going to help you, and that kind of stuff. SIG contributor experience, we tend to also do a lot of the meta work. So everything from running the YouTube channel, moderating the forums, the lists, helping run the elections. Let's see, what else did I do? The GitHub management is an entire sub project of SIG contributor experience. We run events normally. So if you go to a KubeCon and you're a contributor, we have a contributor summit with new content for people who are like, hey, this is my first time contributing to, hey, I've been around here for years, running workshops, that kind of things. We run mentorship programs, and, all of this, organizing all that always needs different types of skills. So lately we've been getting a lot of people that are interested in program management, right? That know how to organize,
So talk about that more in the sense of because of like, it's easy to conceptualize. Here's like a PR, right? I wrote some code and then I talked to your delightful bot, which was just a great experience. And now it routes that around. But like, if I want to like how do I contribute if I want to like work on the docs, or like you can't like submit yourself as a pull request.
So SIG docs is actually the first SIG that I got involved with. When I started, I needed to fix something for work, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do that. So that is an entire SIG that you could just show up, and docs is always an area where people can contribute. We always need technical writers, and we always need like copywriters. And things like the Kubernetes blog also fall under docs. So that's also a great place. I try to tell people, hey, you saw something cool at work, write it up for the blog. It's just a markdown pull request. Like it's, sometimes people aren't aware, hey, it's an open source project. I can submit a blog post. Yeah, absolutely. Put it up there. So docs is an excellent place to contribute because it's always an area. The project moves fast, right? We release 4 times a year. That's like twice as fast as like your normal Linux distros. So, and the docs are versioned, right? So there's always something new and that you can work on. So SIG docs is one of the areas that, I tell people, even if you don't want to contribute to docs, just going to the meetings and like helping take notes or listening or seeing, okay, here are the enhancement proposals that the SIG is talking about, can help spin you up on what's going on there. But yeah, docs is definitely a place where we could use help. It's relatively low barrier to entry. It's just Markdown and Hugo. You just
so the avenue there. I mean, there's always the avenue of like if you just send in a PR for something, right? That'll notify things. But then there's also I imagine you could also like talk to someone. Like, is there that like that and be like, I have a non-technical thing I want to do. Like, how do I?
Yeah. I tell people just show up to a meeting.
There you go.
All of our SIGs, we have a little section that says, hey, is there anybody new here? Anyone's first timer? And then it's not uncommon to see, hey, everybody, I'm George. I have these skills. I want to do this. And it's like, well, what do you want to work on? And I'm like, yeah, I submitted my first PR and I'm kind of lost, and then, in our meeting, in our SIG, we usually, okay, do we have a volunteer to help this person out, close out this loop? And then they kind of start that way. I also recommend people to like find a buddy, find a mentor. And that's something we try to do, is pair people up where it's like, okay, you're both new here. We try to curate certain issues, or, in GitHub that say good first issue. This is something that we could always do a better job at. That's like, hey, I'm new here. What do we need to do? And we, like in our SIG, we always have there's always a list of stuff that needs to get done, but might not look important to new people or outsiders coming in, but that need to get done. So what I like to do is I like to save things that look minor, but are good for new people, right? So if I meet a technical person, they say, I'm like, what are you good at? And they're like, I know Git, I know Markdown, I've done pull requests before. Okay, here's an easy one, because we also do things the Kubernetes way with this bot and all that stuff. So here, change the dates on this document to be more up to date, for the next milestones, or whatever.
Yeah. No, that's
relatively
interesting.
Easy, but it gives you a chance to kind of, okay, I've submitted my pull request. There's a reviewer. Someone does a LGTM, which means someone says, look good to me. And then a second person, who is the approver, kind of gives it the final thumbs up. So you get 2 reviews on everything. And then, okay, cool. You got your first pull request, congratulations, and then we all give them a thumbs up in Slack. And then, then they're ready to move on to something more complicated in that. In certain cases, there are people who are they just dive in, or they might know someone, or they're a senior person in a networking stack on some other component, in some other open source project, and then they slot in. Like, it's not uncommon to see lots of open stackers, in Kubernetes that just kind of like ramped up very quickly because they know the problem space. Right?
Yeah. A similar gargantuan community with similar management
exactly.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's the idea. I'll have to see if I remember to think about later, is the idea of saving tasks to onboard people with, right? Like that would make it's an interesting form of like delegation of like, but it's not only like delegation to like let you focus on spending your time more valuably, but also like make sure that, as you were saying, you can like train other people, or get other people under. Okay, all right. So let's see if I can get us back up here. So we have you're organized into SIGs of the various components, and these are the people like working on the actual Kubernetes code, and and docs and other sort of the thing of Kubernetes. They are the builders of it. So then where do we expand to after that? What else is going on?
So I want to do app developers last.
Of course.
So the next step is people who are building products on top, right? You have like your core developers, and then your outside kind of drive-by developers. There's a lot. The Venn diagram is like really meshed in when it comes to the second group. So these are people like, you might be a Googler who works on Kubernetes, but your day job is Anthos, right? I work on Kubernetes, but my, part of my day job is Tanzu, and so on and so forth. EKS, AKS, all the cloud providers, have one, and you have integrators. There's this nice intersection of smaller companies that fill niches within the ecosystem that are also deeply involved in Kubernetes. I'm thinking people like Weaveworks, Supergiant, and a lot of these companies have been around for a while. I've been doing a lot of Kubernetes. Kinvolk is another one. I shouldn't have started a list now.
Now you want to finish it.
Yeah, anybody. Yeah. So, you have these kind of different areas of the ecosystem being served by different companies and things like that. So a lot of that balance, I think, goes from, we ship product, but there's the open source thing. And the analogies I try to use the ecosystem of like a forest. We build furniture, but it's important that the trees are healthy, that they're being renewed properly, and in a way, a lot of us are forest rangers, right? Like, sure, I sell furniture, but I also like care about
your supply chain, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Everything from like the composition of the soil, the chemistry, all that kind of stuff that you think about, to keep an ecosystem healthy. software needs the same thing, right? And that's not just the code itself, but that's like support in other ways, whether that be doing things at KubeCon or any of the myriad kind of things that happen to make this project kind of continue to move forward.
Yeah.
So those, I mean, like I said, like they're very similar to the first group. It's just, there's like a Venn diagram.
So what, like how, I mean, yeah. So what is that part of the community? How do they fit in? What am I trying to ask?
Yeah.
Like, is there a programmatic way of dealing with them? Like, or do you is it just sort of like, we're all humans, we'll figure it out?
Coolest thing Kubernetes ever did. This is an open secret. Nobody ever figures it out. And like, this is like the one thing Sarah Novotny taught me. She was like one of the first Kubernetes community manager. Is Kubernetes explicitly, when it was open sourced, has a set of values, right? And one is community is always bigger than an individual company. So in a way, when we're working in the community, everyone is kind of forced to wear their upstream hat. Now, in a lot of projects preceding it, this might have been a problem, might not have been a problem. But one of the things that drew me to Kubernetes is that the project itself explicitly says, community comes first, then your company. And then that kind of helps limit, I think, a lot of the issues that might affect other things. So we have things like affiliation limits, right? On steering committee, you can't have more than, X amount of people from a certain company.
All right.
It's not uncommon for, if you have two co-chairs of a SIG, one works at one company A, one works at company B. If the person in company B ends up working at company A, it's not uncommon for that SIG to say, you know what, we need diversity in co-chairs, so let's swap someone out. And I think our leadership and our contributors are very cognizant of that because they've seen how that benefits the community in general. And then in some cases, some people might have experienced when that doesn't work and have the expertise to be able to say, you know what, this is a really good idea and we should sustain it. So it's never been, in my experience, there's never really been an issue where there's like an upstream thing where you have like two competitors, fighting, or like that just doesn't really, in my experience, I think
that's here, so. I mean, I think that's what over the years you learn from, or one learns from watching open source communities, is it's
right.
As you were going over, it's important to have like some norms, if not rules, about the involvement of the vendor world, right?
Right.
I mean, because
right.
I mean, as you're alluding to, right? Like the thing you always want to avoid is in some previous communities in time, like, whether it's true or not, like once you get the specter of like some moneyed interest, I think we call them special interests in American politics, but some vendor or someone else is trying to like push the direction of something. Like whether it's true or not, like it becomes annoying to deal with. So that,
and the leadership of the companies, they need to understand that. Right? Like it would be untenable, right? If we were to say, hey, we need this feature in Tanzu, but we are depending on the community to ship it. Like, you would never make that promise, like internally, to put something in a product depending on open source. Now, what you do is, right, oh, this is important to us. We will invest in that feature or that area, but that is a long-term process. It's not, hey, we need this by this release, so we're going to give you this engineers. Let's make it happen. People have tried that in the past in other projects and things like that. It can never work that way, right? Tanzu is very dependent on being installed in multiple clouds, right? So we invest in SIG cluster lifecycle as VMware. That is a long-term investment that isn't, we don't sit there and say, oh boy, if we don't get this feature in kind in the next 6 months, the entire product is going to fall apart. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you have to kind of use it, the tree has to grow before you
make furniture.
Resource. Before you can make the furniture, right? But you got to think about planning and all the life cycle of the entire thing. So the leadership definitely has to be invested and has to understand that, and we do. And that's how you kind of make the whole thing work. So that's kind of how like the people who productize this and then ship it kind of
Right. No, that
of
makes
thing
sense.
works.
That makes sense. Okay, so we got the vendor part of the community there.
We got two.
What comes
Your
after
third
this?
is your platform builders, which I think this is one of those things where I wish I could go back in time and like try to re-explain people what Kubernetes is. I think every time you've seen someone try to do Kubernetes stuff and then they fail and you look at them and then you ask, there's times where I'm like, what are you trying to do here? Kubernetes is, and Joe Beto, one of the co-founders, has said this, Kubernetes is a platform for making platforms. And I think a lot of people approach it in a different way where they, the meme where it's like, hey, I have a small problem. Let me use Kubernetes.
Right.
In a lot of cases, wrong tool for the wrong job. So like the way I try to explain it to people is, look, you work in technology, you work for a large company. They have a thing internally, right? Everyone's always trying to build their own Heroku thing internally. They always have cool names too. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So you work at a large retailer and then you have this huge system and it was built and it works. You go to another one, they have the same thing. You go to another thing, they have the same thing. All of those things are all snowflakes. If I work for retailer A and I want to, work at retailer B, it's a whole different technology stack and, all that kind of stuff. The one thing Kubernetes does well is it makes building systems like that commoditized, right?
Right.
So that you can build your platforms on that and just use the Kubernetes APIs. It's all about APIs. And then I tell people, if Kubernetes is successful at one thing, it's ensuring that whatever platform people are building at your place will be building common components. And that's a shared talent pool of developers, people who know the technology, lower costs for everybody. So it's kind of a tool set for people who make the tool sets.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell people, look, you read on Hacker News that you just throw Kubernetes at something and all your problems are going away. And now, it's a year later, and you're sitting there in your pile of fail, wondering what happened.
Yeah. I always have found the platform for building platforms framing confusing and like,
right.
And also like frustrating. I mean, just to allow myself a miniature rant with someone who's actually in the Kubernetes world, right? Like I feel like there was this, this doesn't really exist so much in the Kubernetes world anymore, but at some point early on, there was this strange, I don't know the phrase for it, but there was this phenomena where it was like developers were really interested in Kubernetes. And so everyone who's a Kubernetes advocate would talk to them about it and go over it.
Yep.
But then they would immediately say, this is not for you. Yeah. Right? And so it was this weird, like, it's almost like this fuel that I feel like drove early Kubernetes interest was like fueled by these people that somehow it was very weird and incongruous. And at some point, the whole notion of like it's a platform for platforms finally like settled out. Or I feel like the official Kubernetes like thought line, the party line was like, yes, that's what it is, and we should kind of toe the line. And so when a developer wants to come and do our stuff, we should be like, hey man, this is maybe not for you, right? Like we really appreciate your interest, but like we're not going to sort of like enable your different view of what this is.
Right. Yeah, I tell individuals when they ask, they're like, what should I know about Kubernetes? And we'll move to the app developer in a second. I was like, look, man, for most people, figure out your workflow to spit out a container. Right. And
exactly.
You will be at an organization where a team will take that and a computer will deploy that thing somewhere.
Yeah. And so exactly. And so the thing I've been trying to like wrap my head around over the past, whenever this was. Yeah. Since the beginning of this year or so, right? I mean, when as you know, when Pivotal and Heptio came into VMware, now we need to like know about each other's stuff more. So I've been trying to figure out like how it all fits together. And like I think maybe from that application developer standpoint, right? Like what I've been trying to figure out is like, I think what I would tell them is that Kubernetes, as far as you're concerned, is like an architecture. And not so much that it's even an architecture, but it specifies an architecture that you should use, right? And so like, don't get obsessed like, cause developers, one of the things they're taught is like, do things in the Unix way. Right. Which is, I forget what the official phrasing is, have a bunch of small little things that do a really good job that know when to use a caret versus a pipe and versus a double greater than sign or whatever. Right. And so just coordinate a bunch of small things that pass stuff on to each other. And like, What that phrase is not saying is understand how to build a Unix system, right? Like, and instead, like, just use the platform as Unix and do this development in this style, this way of architecting.
It's distributed Unix, right? Like,
Exactly.
usually people are like, the criticism of Kubernetes, oh, it's too complicated. You're using a huge hammer for a tiny nail. But when you look at the things people are trying to do, it is complicated for a reason, right? I would love to tell you, it's really simple and stuff, but then people are like, well, I need multi-regions, I need failover, I need self-healing, I need storage, I need the network should be transparent and magical. I should just DNS should just work magically. Like
we had a joke. We used to have a joke like way back in the Cloud Foundry world where like people would say, I want to build my own cloud. And then we would talk with them and they would say like, this is so complicated. Yeah. And you would be like, yeah, but you wanted to build your own cloud. Like it's not, it's not simple. But,
and that's moving on to app developers.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to tell them. I wanted to save them for last because seriously, I want app developers to never care about Kubernetes at all.
Right.
I started to go, I was very unfamiliar with like Pivotal stuff. Right. So I have a local Spring group here in Detroit. So I went to it and I was just, my eyes opened on what app developers, look and stuff. And in my brain, I sat there. So, if these people have to learn Kubernetes, I have failed them. I want, do your Spring. And then all the other stuff, that integration, that's all on us to figure out for them. Right. Obviously we want them to be designing their applications with those patterns in mind. Right. But I feel like these general kind of distributed computing patterns are easier for them to grok. That I just see like a Java developer sitting there trying to figure out their deployment.yaml or whatever. Maybe not, right? There's certain things that we can do to make that experience easier for them.
Absolutely.
It's just right now because the excitement was there and it was solving problems for a lot of people. And I'm still surprised every day where it's like, oh yeah, we've been running this in production for like a really long time. And the speed upgrades are still kind of, for some people still can't figure out things, but it's showing a value to them. So it still feels like early days, right? So when people are like, I don't like Kubernetes, this YAML and all that kind of stuff, it's like, yeah, trust me, we hate it too. It's still like kind of early days as far as like gelling all that stuff. The same way that when I got into Linux, you had to build your own kernel if you wanted your USB keyboard to work.
Right. Yes.
And then, I think we'll look back hopefully in a few years and see the progress on the kind of higher level abstractions that we're making. And I think it's up to not just us as Kubernetes, but those platform making people as well, right? If you're building this at work for someone, if you're deploying a Kubernetes style thing, I think everyone's looking for like the cool thing that just lets a developer on their laptop do one command, close it, right?
Yeah.
Look at a dashboard, everything's green. I'm going to the pub. See ya.
Well, I think that's a good launching point into our last little topic, and then we'll wrap up. Which is, so you're making me think. Like, so is there a SIG group that's like for the application developers, like to figure out like
we do have SIG
working
apps
for them?
Yeah. So we have SIG apps. However, this is a huge space. If you think about it, there's no one SIG that cover this, right? Like for example, Helm used to be part of SIG apps, right? Then it got mature and things so much so that it just kind of split out from Kubernetes, and now it's its own top level CNCF project. Right?
Yeah.
And that's just Helm.
Yeah, that would make sense. Because that is mostly kind of sort of ish for application developers, maybe sort of, right? Like, yeah.
Or things that application developers will consume, I guess is a more.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But even beyond that, even beyond developer tools, let's call it that. But like, so I remember I had a conversation with one of a long time ago with one of the OpenStack board people, and I was at maybe RedMonk or 451 at the time. So of course I was talking about developers, right? And I was basically like, so with application developers, like, what do you do for them, right? Because like, how do they find out what to do beyond to get OpenStack up and running? And it seems like, as we were just discussing, right? Like it is a distributed Unix application or a distributed application. So there's almost like, here's how to architect and write an application that will run well on Kubernetes, never minding actual commands that you use, or like never minding this, but
Right.
this is just like this doing things this way runs better. Like that, with my extremely limited technical thing, right? Like the one when I was kind of going down this path over the past year, like the one thing that I realized is like at a very minimum, you have to implement, if you're writing code that's going to be running in a container, that's going to be in a node that's in a pod. Did I get that order right? That's going to be in a cluster, whatever, right? Like you write some code, and what you're responsible for as the developer is you have to implement, I don't even remember what they're called, but you've got to implement these 5 hooks or lifecycle events, which is 1, boot up. Are you booting up? Are you okay? I'm about to kill you. You're dead. Right. And like, so these, you have to tell Kubernetes to call these methods that you somehow define, whether it's through, REST or memory or sticking a file, so whatever it is. And like you as the application developer, that must be implemented. Now you can go get a framework like Spring to help you like do all that. But eventually you are responsible for telling this infrastructure you're running in if you can be killed or not. Right. And so like that's what I mean as far as like there's this whole like architecture and like series of patterns that the application developer does need to care about beyond like, how do I get networking to work?
Right. And then it actually gets worse, right? Because when you first started, you're like, okay, I think I figured out this model, right? And then someone says, how do I do this? 12-factor apps, have a good time. I'll see you later, right? But then, in the real world, it's totally different, right? It's like, sure. I have an application that if you change its IP address when it gets killed in a pod and comes somewhere else, like it totally isn't set up for
Right, exactly.
Because now you're doing stuff in the real world and it's totally different, right? And it's like, hey, I know we said no state. All my apps use state, and then it's like, well, now what do we do? Right. And then it started from like, okay, this is the model, it's going to fit. But after a while, as certain patterns started to use and people started to use it in anger, all of a sudden someone was like, stateful sets might be a good idea. Right. When I first started, everyone's like, no, never databases. That's what are you doing? Now you can hang out with like a Josh Burkus and he's like, hey, check out all these things I can do with databases that I get in Kubernetes. And this actually solves problems for a lot of people. And you're like, you know what? I think you convinced me. Yeah, I get it. So I think there's this like kind of meme where it's like, guess what, everybody, we're rewriting the entire world in Go microservices or whatever. It's like, no, but I think you've seen the project adapt to things like that. But I think it's an area that's still very much like the situation is still developing. I could give you so many tools that are in this space that the questions aren't answered yet. And this is always my favorite time too, in like an ecosystem and open source project. You have tons of tools. Nobody really knows what the right answer is. People tend to gravitate towards big ones, and then just kind of watching to see how the situation develops is the exciting part right now for everyone except the enterprise who's like watching to see what happens. Right. So I think this kind of like accelerated like evolution, seeing which organisms will thrive in this specific ecosystem is interesting. Because if you would have asked me a few years ago, hey, I have a PHP monolith app at work, I was like, man, I don't know how we're gonna,
what we're gonna do about that, right?
I ain't got nothing for you. I mean, see what you got, but now you see people just kind of,
oh, there's my son.
Yeah. Like now you kind of see people saying, you know what? I took this pattern from Kubernetes and I'm running a thing that no one, and you kind of look at it and be like, huh, it's really interesting. And then these are always the best talks at KubeCon because it's always like, here's what we learned and here's what we broke. And it's always a bunch of things that are unexpected. And that kind of helps just push the state of the art forward when it comes to like data center. Like we make data center operating systems, right?
Yeah. No, that's what I'm like looking forward to over the next year is like how the Kubernetes world product manages application developers, to put it in one way, right? In the sense of like there's all these sort of like needs that we're discovering and nice things that we can do for application developers and the people and the enterprises or organizations they're working on behalf of. And so we should do that. Well, I think that's my signal that it's time to end this live broadcast.
Hi.
and these are my kids here. But yeah, thanks for being on. That was I feel like I've gotten pretty smart on this. And so if people wanted to, in a very non-creepy way, find you on the internet and see what's going on, where would you
Castro
see them?
Jo on Twitter. If you go to kates.dev, K8S.dev, you can go in there and you'll see the list of all the things that get started. We have contributor guides. We have documentation. If you find yourself lost, you could just always ping me on Twitter, ping me on something. We can get you started. Like I said, you don't have to be a hacker. You don't have to be a developer. In fact, those kind of other skills that you have, program management, technical writing, all that stuff, we love it. We have people whose contributions are like, you know what? I'm really good at like helping managing Slack channels. You know,
oh yes,
1,000 people on our Slack.
So
right?
so basically,
so like that's a real job. That's a need that the project needs, right? And it's not, it doesn't make it unimportant. You know what I mean? The machine needs to keep going, and if one part breaks down, the whole thing slows down. So everybody's important. There is no.
There's nothing to be left on the floor as far as energy that people want to expend to help out.
Exactly.
So let's see. We've come up with we got 4 parts of the community. How the sort of internally focused people like organize around. How a little bit of how the Kubernetes community kind of like works beneficially with the vendor world, and then we've got the kind of, as you were kind of saying, the solidification. Is that how you say it? Solidification? That sounds like one of those words I might make up.
Sounds right.
Yeah, the solidification of the platform builder operator role, which I think was almost kind of not as explicit as it could have been in early years, but now it's very explicit and makes a lot of sense. And then we got our application developers, and then more importantly, there's all sorts of things to help out with. You just go to kates.dev and you can start to get involved. And it seems like the best way to figure out contributing and getting involved, and the kind of the core of it is just as they like to say, show up at meetings, and people are pretty interested in getting help from that.
Yeah, I can't tell you the amount of people who are just like, I started fixing a little bug, and then I went to a meeting, and the next thing you know, you get a KubeCon, you're making friends, you're having a good time. The community is very inclusive, is very friendly. We pride ourselves in like, taking the time to mentor people and to bring them in, and that's just something that's great. And I think that's like Kubernetes has brought software to the world, and I think that's good, but kind of, and Kubernetes wasn't the first to do this, right? And it won't be the last, but the whole idea of, forming a friendly, inclusive community that is trying to solve a problem, in a way that's fun and helpful and fulfilling to the people who contribute, right? Not just, hey, we're making a product, yay, like,
Yeah, I mean, maybe as one last bonus thing, in writing instructions, they're always telling you in your conclusion you should add an unexpected delight to someone, which always seems like, I've always found the problem in like reading reading like tips on writing is it's one of those things where like once you tell people the tricks, they're no longer delightful. But anyways, like
I'm stealing that. I'm totally stealing it.
Anyhow, that I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it, but there is a certain like funness to the Kubernetes community that has existed in other open source communities, but not that many. and it's almost like what is the word that's the positive version of flippant, like the tone of Adventure Time, right? The tone, like Adventure Time is not like cynical, right? But it's very like
there's
flippant.
people who've been around, and then and I've known them for years in other open source projects, and I've sat there and had conversation. I just having one with Clint Byram, and him and I go way back, lots of open source projects, and I was like, if we could only go back and tell ourselves how to do it this way, think about how much less gray hair we would have. I would have some like, and that's the thing now. It's like, we learned these lessons. People like Clint and I learned these lessons. And now we see these new young people who are starting their careers, right? And
right.
Like, if I can start them here, you know what I'm saying? If we can save everybody the famous, getting flamed on a mailing list thing, where are we going to be in 5-10 years from now? Like, that ties into the sustainability thing. So from a professional, leave a place better than when I found it, in my brain, I'm starting to think out there, when I was young and getting started in this and listening to podcasts and figuring out how I was going to do stuff. there's someone out there who's looking for something to do and has the skills or wants to learn the skills. And open sources, we've had people who've grown up in the project. There's a kid, he started in the project when he was like 14. He had to bring his dad to the conferences because he wasn't old enough to travel by himself, right? And then we got to know his dad's like part of the project now, right? Like he's 18 now, and I could tell you so many people that started earlier in their careers and things like that. And for those of us that have kind of been around for a while, it's just, I kind of feel like that gives us purpose, to kind of, this is where we're going to start you off. So you don't have to go through all the things that we did. But you can learn the lessons. So like a lot of the stuff, Kubernetes is just built on the shoulders of giants. And I think it's awesome that the early founders of the project and the early community people looked at all the things that worked in projects and kind of wrapped it all together. And now you see this kind of, I used to call it the kind of Kubernetes way, but it's kind of the cloud native way, right? You can go to another cloud native project that isn't Kubernetes and related and meet the same kind of people. And they have the same kind of, friendliness and openness. And when if you're sitting in a group and a new person approaches you, you open, and you bring them in. Hey, how are you? Just these kind of little things that it doesn't even make the web page.
Yeah. No. I mean, all of that. Yeah, no, it is. It's like that community is the most recent big community to try to evolve and improve the idea of how an open source community works.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Well,
Awesome.
This is exactly what I was looking for. Now, if you've actually watched this far, dear listener, watcher, and you don't know what's happening, this is as I was explaining earlier. This is a multi-headed Tanzu Talk thing. This may be a podcast. You might be seeing it right now as a live stream, or maybe you're seeing the replay on the recorded YouTube thing. But what you should do either way is definitely, if you're interested in like seeing more of this type of stuff, if you go to twitch.tv/VMware Tanzu, we got all sorts of shows going on. And you can also just subscribe to a podcast if you like Tanzu Talk, but you don't get all the shows. And then, as always, well, we'll see how long this goes on, but like more or less during the weekdays, I'm here in Amsterdam, so I do a daily sort of thing. Tanzu Talk Live, if you will, at 11 a.m. Central European Time. I don't know if it's daylight savings or not. I lose track of what that even means. But, basically if you're in Europe and not in the Canary Islands or the UK, I think it's 11 a.m., as I recall. And so with that, thanks again, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.